Shelburne Fisher, or Toon as he was known around town, was born on September 22, 1878, to Benjamin and Martha Fisher in Centerville. He was a lifelong resident, attended the local school system, and participated in the usual local activities. Shelburne was a member of the Elks Lodge, was well known for his kindness and generosity, and was noted to be quick to lend financial assistance to those in need. In 1897, when he was 19 years old, Shelburne opened the Fisher Livery Barn located just off the northeast corner of the square, behind what used to be Mormon's Laundromat, and just across and behind from where the pitch currently operates. There he was engaged in the draying and livery business. The Fisher Livery Barn would haul goods for you on a wagon, rent you a horse, or just provide a place for those living in town to keep their own horses. His business could have been compared to today's semi-truck owner-operators, or to a lesser extent, a 19th century grub hub for luggage. Oftentimes you'd see Shelburne hauling luggage from the depot south of town to the Continental on the square in knee-deep mud. A story about him in the Iowegian stated that one frequent business traveler to Centerville thought so much of him that each time he got to town, he'd tell everyone to line their luggage up out front. Then he'd pay Shelburne to haul it all up to town, just so Shelburne got all the business. A few years later, Shelburne met Nellie Rogers, who relocated here with her family from Monmouth, Illinois, and the two quickly fell in love. On the evening of July 8, 1901, Shelburne and Nellie slipped out from a party they were hosting and were married by Pastor A.V. Kendrick of the First Methodist Church. They returned to the gathering and announced, "Surprise, we got married," much to the delight of everyone at the party. Shelburne and Nellie were the parents of Blanche, and she was their only child. The three of them lived with Shelburne's friend, James Peyton, for a number of years while they set aside money for a home of their own. After a few years, they were finally able to start building their house on Washington Street. One of Shelburne's services was his horse-drawn hearse, which likely made many trips to the grounds around us. Unfortunately, one of those trips would soon be for one of his own. On a cold February day in 1912, Nellie, who had previously been in perfect health, felt a bit off in the morning but continued about her day. She helped her family get up and around and saw her husband off to the stables. Around 3 o'clock, she began feeling much worse and sent the neighbors to bring her husband home. The doctor was called, but by that evening, Nellie was dead, never to live in the home being built for her to share with her husband and daughter. Shelburne continued on with his business ventures and raised Blanche alone. Tragedy would strike again the next year when fire would break out in his stables. The property, as well as everything he was storing within for himself and others, was a near total loss. He rebuilt, and for a time the business continued on as before. But as we know, automobiles became all the rage, and horses were no longer a stable venture. Somebody got it. In 1916, when the writing was on the wall, Shelburne sold all of his remaining livery barn stock and equipment to Lloyd Witzel. It was rumored that he and his daughter would leave town, but nobody really knew for sure. Everyone simply wished him the best in his future endeavors. 3 years later, in 1919, still in Centerville, Shelburne decided to transition into housing the new mode of transportation. He hired a crew of local workers and built the Fisher Garage where his stables once stood. Initial plans were for a grand structure with 20,000 square feet of floor space, 2 stories tall, and a second floor of apartments. The final structure was a quarter of that size, 10,000 square feet and 1 story tall. It was still impressive, however, as it contained the modern amenities of electric lighting and steam heating for the automobiles. Initially, Shelburne wished to operate the garage himself and serve as a dealer for Page & Jewett Automobiles of Detroit, Michigan. Those plans fell through, and Shelburne never parked a car in his garage. With few alternatives, he was forced to lease the garage to cover his expenses. In stepped Lacey Morrison, a well-known auto mechanic from Unionville, Iowa, who had moved to Centerville and operated a garage on South 12th Street. On November 3, 1919, Morrison held a grand opening of what was then called Morrison Garage, despite Shelburne Fisher's name being permanently recorded in stone on the building's facade. Local favorites, the Peyton Jazz Band, played music until the early hours, refreshments were served, and it said that the dancers were packed in so thick that hardly anyone could move. Reports of the day called it one of the most well-attended and lively openings of a business in the city's history. The garage would go on to serve as a dealership for Pullman Motors, Chevrolet, and Parks and Brunt Ford. As time marched on, and automotive manufacturers combined, closed, and changed business practices over the years, The Fisher Garage would eventually cease operations. In later years, the building would serve as a nightclub. In October of 1977, John Knowles of Centerville installed an impressive sound system and opened a disco aptly named The Garage. In an Iwegian article on the opening, amenities such as a large wooden bar and carpeting throughout were highlighted, along with a strict dress code and a noontime salad bar. Nothing like a disco with a salad bar. After the disco went bust, the building continued on as home to another nightclub known as the Mine Shaft. Their claim to fame was staying open after liquor sales cut off at 2 and serving coffee for people to wind down with. This too closed with time, and the building now serves as storage space for a local business. In his later years, Shelburne lived with his daughter Blanche and her husband in Muscatine. As he grew old, the common ailments of his day began to take their toll. His daughter, in an attempt to bring him some relief, took him to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where she checked him into a spa. Not the kind of spa we're familiar with, but the kind where one soaked in natural mineral waters that those of the time believed would bring healing and comfort to the chronically ill. After 4 days of treatment, Mr. Fisher told Blanche that he felt much better and insisted she return home to her family. Reluctantly, she did. A few short days later, she received terrible news. Her father, having retired to his room for an afternoon nap, had died in his sleep of a heart attack. Per his wishes, Shelburne Fisher was returned to Centerville. Local mortician Hugh Johnson of Johnson Funeral Home traveled to Hot Springs to retrieve Shelburne and bring him home. Here he was reunited with his wife, who had passed 28 years earlier, both buried here before us in Centerville's Oakland Cemetery.